So, it's league start time again, and I would like to bring you my 3.22 update for the Poison Seismic Trap Saboteur guide I've been maintaining for a while now. There's going to be a huge disclaimer about the build, but first gameplay, I get it. There are nerfs as well, so what you're looking at right now is a version of the build that, in this case, even self-curses, basically, but I've taken off, I'm not gonna self-cast Despair, and I'm gonna take off Temporal Chains entirely because I got a huge nerf. You're still gonna use it in 3.22, but I cannot simulate that nerf, right? So I'm just gonna take it off. That's a bit sad, but it's okay. Also, we have a huge nerf on this focus mod that I still have on this helmet. So I'm just not gonna use focus either. That means it should be easier to get an additional aura, to get skitter bots back on the menu essentially. So I'm not having skitter bots either here, right? Other than that, this is obviously a very late game character. It should even have... Oh, it doesn't actually have. I thought it had... okay, it does not have the fancy gems, right? I don't know where they went. Doesn't matter. The awakened gems. It must be somewhere in the stash, right? So it's without awakened gems, actually. But other than that, it's obviously a very endgame version of this whole thing. And just want to give you an idea how this looks, right? So you're basically a shield chargey character, which is kind of cool. You're somewhat fast. I mean, we can do this essence here as well. And automated flasks, obviously. Almost dying. Nice. And you have like your malevolence, which you have to press from time to time. And other than that, it's not a zoomy, right? It doesn't even have to damage anymore to be hyper zoomy. So you're kind of waddling around, throwing traps in front of you if possible. Sometimes, like if you see a yellow mob, I'm trying to curse it real quick and maybe throw a seismic. Other than that, it's exsanguinate, right? Exsanguinate traps. You can also, like me, have really obnoxious MTX on it. So you ideally don't see anything. So you're kind of waddling around. As you can already see, like in terms of defense, it's fine. I mean, the map isn't that dangerous. It's kind of okay. It's not actually, I'm going to talk about that in a sec. It's not actually like super tanky, but it feels kind of tanky because you get so much regen and you can kind of adjust your playstyle not to charge into mobs, and you have this huge blind, right? In terms of bossing, obviously, ideally we would have a double curse here. We can just throw our stuff down, and then it kind of dies, and we die as well, and then it's that, right? Is it super insanely flashy? No, it's not. It's a very relaxed kind of thing. And this is more for because you want to play it. And other than that, yeah, I'm gonna talk about that in a second. Other than that, I've recorded like same character, not the boss. I'm not using the bossing setup here. It's like an Excel dude. Same gems, it's like exactly same character. I did it a bit earlier, but there's no sound, so I was a bit confused. So I don't know. It's a normal exarch. It's not a tutorial version, which is way easier, right? That's the very normal one, and it kind of dies, right? It's still without awakened gems. I also die because I don't. I don't dodge the thing, but it's kind of dying. So even if you have an earlier version of the build with half the damage, is it a bosser? No. Can you get your watchstones? Definitely. Can you kill one of these dudes? If you need to, then even with half the damage, you can get it done, right? It's gonna be totally fine. If that's your goal, just like getting through the game once, you know, killing everything, then you can pretty much do that. Maybe just have a look at the kind of damage again. Like if you look at the health bar, I said it's a very normal exarch. It's not an Uber, but it's good enough. It's fine. It's not great, but it's okay. Cool. So with that gameplay showcase, there's also a ton on my channel from previous leagues, from this league, where you can watch a lot of gameplay and all kind of things. You're gonna figure it out. Big disclaimer. So the build got nerfed a bunch of times over the last leaks while I'm maintaining the guide, and it got a huge hit again on temporal chains, and also the focus mod is kind of gone. So at this point, I feel like the entire build, while it already wasn't ideal anymore last league, it wasn't great anymore last league, it was just solid. I feel like it still is kind of solid. it's at a point where I wouldn't like straight up recommend it anymore that you play it. So, however, I said I feel like it's good enough to get everything done, right? To like complete the entire atlas, right? To do challenges and especially to get to a point where you can farm, for example, expedition relatively easily, and you still then have some options to invest. One thing why I still maintained the guide and didn't just like scrap it, right? Say, okay, no more updates, fuck it. Is this basically this document here? You have this huge amount of notes, and I updated all of them. You have huge amount of trees. You have your gems, right? And you have like your gear sets. What this still is a very detailed handheld progression guide that allows you, even as a less experienced player, to get through the game without getting stuck, ideally, right? And that's what it's for. If that's something you're looking for like a super, super handheld experience that I guarantee you can clear the game, it's gonna be fine. And you're not, right? You're not rushing for anything, right? And you don't want to get baited on something that just straight up doesn't work at all, then I can still highly recommend it. Even last league, I said it wasn't that great anymore. I had a bunch of people join the Discord and message later, and they were really happy just because they got through the game. And people don't necessarily need a insanely powerful character, right? If that's something you're looking for, absolutely look somewhere else, and there's enough other builds that are super flashy right now that have multiple times this power. So with that out of the way, let's get into the actual kind of guide part thing, right? So we're going to use path of building like always, and you need to be somewhat familiar with it, and I can only highly recommend it that you're actually using it, and especially that you're actually using this notes section. Like everything you need to know is in there. It makes sense if you start out that you might want to read like these different steps, read through them once. Because while you're doing like one phase or you're at one step, there might be information in steps a bit later, what's about to come that influence your decision. So it's good if you have like a general overview. I'm gonna go through this with you, through the entire thing. Gonna make like a really chill thing, get something to drink probably if you actually want to play this. If you are unsure yet, you can also just grab the POB. On that note, where do you get the POB? There's like sorry for the flashbang. There's like a Google document. This is just the editing version, but it's a Google document in the description. So you can get everything about the build from this Google document. You don't need to open the video all the time. There's typically the guide, isn't updated yet. That's what we are recording right now. And there's already a bit regarding patch notes there. There's leveling runs from last league. If I got some time, they might update. But again, you can either, I don't know, subscribe, I guess, so you get a notification, or you just look in the Google document, right? It's going to be updated in here. You can also join the Discord. Typically, whenever I do updates, I notify people there. There's like a channel. If you unmute the POB update channel, then you get a notification in case there's like an update. I'm not using this at everyone for anything else, just for that if I feel like there's an important update. Something about filters in here, and here's where you find the POB, right? And there's a changelog here, so you can always check back, is there a newer version? Make sure you use the newest version, because I do update them as we approach the league and often even during the league. So yeah, that's where you get that. Overall, probably we should also talk a bit about weaknesses of the build, right? Where is it weak? It doesn't have insane damage anymore, the way I build it, and on the budget I try to build it. And it lacks defense at some points, right? Where it kind of lacks damage is around like getting early into maps and just swapping to traps. In this kind of state, it kind of doesn't feel perfect as it was. It doesn't feel as insane as it was. Earlier, you can kill everything, and especially if you don't have too much zoom in needs, you're gonna be perfectly fine. You can murder everything. In terms of defenses, if you just look at this number right now, because you always have to like select the same things for everything to make sense. But if you just look at the number of how much life we get from tree, right? Like early maps, we get a whopping 86%. So you're not gonna have too much life. And also, even this one is not correct because of the gear right now, you're gonna have rather low physical damage mitigation. So what that means is you're gonna get one shot from time to time. It's based on these values, it's actually surprising how tanky it actively feels while you're playing it. But that is because, assuming you have the correct playstyle, right? Which means you do not shield charge into packs. You stay outside of the packs and you throw your traps in front of you, essentially. It's like stutter stepping in front of you. Combined with huge amount of blind and damage reductions in that area, it feels surprisingly tanky because there isn't actually that much that hits you. So it's a little bit of a weird spot, but you can and you will get one shot, right? Especially physical stuff. If something actually hits you, like a big physical hit, you might just drop that. Smaller stuff isn't that big of a deal because of, is it this one? Yeah, of this node here. Like, since you're constantly throwing a bunch of these exsanguinate traps, you regen a lot. Like, while you're fighting and while your traps are getting triggered, you constantly bounce up, right? That's like perfectly fine. It's really, really cool. So either get one shot or you don't die at all. Issue kinda is if you are not fighting, and there and also in general comes the issue of damage over time effects. Degens. You're immune to ignite and shock. Bleed is pretty easily solved by corrupting blood immunity and a bleed flask, obviously. But in general, obviously, this like constant huge degens problem because we don't have any region, effectively any region outside of this node here, right? So as long as you're throwing traps, that's fine. But you might not be after packs are dead and there's still damage over time and then nothing to trigger your traps. Can be a bit annoying. Same with boss fights, especially with certain boss fights like the Maven. The Maven is surprisingly difficult there because of her mechanics and the lack of regen. So you might struggle with that a bit. That's like the two things I would say that are defensively a bit annoying. Spell suppression, we get pretty early, pretty high spell suppression, a lot from the tree as well, so it's not that bad on your gear early on. But yeah, overall, you're gonna die at some point. And if we look a bit further on like this number here, like if we go through like the progression, then it gets up a little bit and a little bit more, and then at the end you get 131, which is still low, right? I mean, you've just seen me do the map that already has basically phase 4 gear, I would say. Is that phase 4? Yeah. There you have some physical mitigation. We get a physical taken as something. We can do this better this time than this character has because we have more space on the helmet. We can get a little bit more there. And also keep in mind I don't have flasks ticked right now because that's conditional and just ticking them all the time is nonsense. So yeah, just keep that in mind, right? Okay. So much about why the build is not good and bad, but you have to kind of, yeah, keep that in mind. So other things. POB configuration is like a really important part, I feel like. I try to be super conservative with this, but let's talk about defense and offense there. So I typically, like there's also phase 5, but let's look at phase 3, 4 kind of thing, and then you might see, okay, has 2.5 million DPS, which is really not that much, right? You can make this number higher conditionally, and I would like to do that for a moment to show you options you have. Like right now, we have this thing here. It says it's an average amount of traps and average amount of waves actually hitting an enemy, right? That's like however POB decides, that's what it's gonna be. So it's not burst DPS. It's not having all traps down at the same time. It's probably gonna be 3 point something, something like that. So if you want to make this stuff bigger, you could go ahead and turn on flasks. It's like the same with defense, right? Your defense gets significantly better if you have your flask on, right? Or arbitrary, this one as well and this one as well. So you can do that. But this one actually, in this case, gives us a little bit more damage, so that's kind of better. You can go into the configuration. You can say, okay, maybe, I don't know, maybe we do have wither stacks. Wither, huge mechanic for the build, right? If you're just having withering stab, you're most likely having 6 wither stacks, right? If you hit the enemy twice with it pretty quickly, you get 12 wither stacks. If you're playing the bossing setup, you probably have 15 wither stacks, because I mean, it's blade trap. It only hits like 50% of the time, but there's so many. So I don't actually know if you get 15 wither stacks. Even if it's 10, it's kind of fine. But let's just assume you hit 15 because there's so many blades. There's like no way it's not 15, and I think it lasts 4 seconds each. So yeah, it's gonna be fine. So that's like a best case scenario, right? You have all that stuff essentially down on the ground. We don't have any focus anymore, but already you have like double kind of the damage. So what else can you do? You could go ahead and say, okay, let's look at maybe something that is closer to burst, right? And we're gonna change this to average amount of waves are going to hit, but we configure this by enemy size. And the enemy size here, in this case, it's medium, right? Medium, as you can see here, Power Building says that's like Maven, Shaper, that's like more smaller bosses. If you would go to large, if you can do it in a minute, there would be bigger bosses. And then there are bigger bosses, obviously. And there's also like the nucleus, like huge things, right? But let's stick for medium for a moment. And what you need to do here then is say, okay, on the seismic trap, we're gonna throw 4 down and include in full DPS. And then you get this value down here. So kind of realistically, you might get this amount of like full DPS, but that's somehow for you to decide, right? Maybe until then the wither stacks are not fully up yet, right? Like a lot of it is very conditional. That's why I try to leave it out. Also on that note, I do have like this 8% more damage seems fair because one node is not working in PoB right now. This should be the temp chains nerf, roughly, because PoB isn't updated yet. And I keep this 10 to 15% just flat out less damage. I mean, you could just remove it for a second. And then you get like a bunch more damage, obviously. But seismic is kind of weird in terms of where the waves go, and sometimes it's better and sometimes it's not, and a lot of it also really depends on your trap placement and how good you are with actually placing down the traps where the enemy really is and doesn't move away. So, but even in an ideal scenario, I feel like seismic sometimes just deals so much more damage because the waves are randomly hitting more, or sometimes you just get unlucky. So I feel a bit better with doing it this way. Regarding this whole, how I call it, like duration kind of situation with there, like you have a few things here. You have, like we have seismic trap here. Yes, we do. Like in this case, we have, it tells us there's like an overlap chance for 43%. It isn't too high, but your seismic trap in this setup here is gonna last like roughly 9 seconds on the ground. It's gonna pulse, right? And if you get trap throwing speed, which you could get way more, it's like a really good stat here, because it will change this pulse frequency, I believe, something like that, or how many pulses you get. And so yeah, the trap is gonna be down for 9 seconds, right? That's a really long time, to be fair. In comparison, the duration of each poison you inflict on the enemy, in case you don't know in terms of how poison works. Poison, the idea is you hit something, you apply the poison if your chance is high enough, and that poison is going to deal a certain amount of damage over this poison termination. Like every time in this specific configuration and with all the stats up, one of the circles of seismic trap hits the enemy, that enemy is going to suffer like almost 500,000 damage over 5 seconds, right? And the interesting part is, while this damage is ticking, you're hitting them again and again and again and again. And poison stacks infinitely, essentially. Not, I mean, there's a cap, but you're not gonna get to the cap with this guide. But it's practically infinite amounts of them hitting them. So what PoB does, if I understand this correctly, it always calculates the maximum poison duration and then basically tries to figure out, okay, until like the first poison runs out, or until you are completely ramped up to the maximum amount of poisons you can have at the same time, based on how often do you hit and how long does your poison last. That's the number it gives you. And that is, to an extent, obviously widely inaccurate, right? If you have a boss and you kill him in 3 seconds, like he's actually dead, then you dealt way less DPS, essentially. Like you don't get the 7-8 million. You don't need it in either. But yeah, that's especially tricky if you get like a huge amount of poison duration. Just to, yeah, you get a bit of an idea with that. So it varies a lot. It needs a lot of ramp time as well. So your enemies need to kind of stay within your traps for some time. Because there are 4 traps going off around the boss and he's moving out of it in a second, or after a second or 2, you've dealt significantly less damage because there was no ramp time, right? So yeah, keep that a little bit in mind. So poison is weird, seismic is kind of weird, and this whole trapping thing is kind of weird in terms of deciding on damage, right? So if sometimes you see other POBs that have like completely insane numbers, be really careful, right? There's like an idea like all waves hitting, and then people even, I don't know, is that even affecting it right now? It's not. Yeah, like you go for like all waves hitting, or you go by enemy size and say, and this is, I mean, you could take this and say, okay, I actually have a larger boss. It gets to like, I don't know, 10 million, or actually a huge boss, like this nucleus in the middle of Maven, for example. Then you might actually get these numbers, right? But it's very subjective, and you can fake a lot if you take different things here. So that's why I like to do this. Keep stuff, like keep it at a minimum, and try to leave out all the conditional things like flasks, because you're not going to have flask sustain during bosses, right? I mean, how you're going to refill this flask at all, right? You can maybe get these free charges when you hit by an enemy for the other flasks. That kind of works during boss fights, but this one doesn't. So if there are no ads, you're just going to run out of this flask. That's it, right? It's a kind of a conditional thing there, I would like to say. So, why is our DPS still high? Oh yeah, because we said it's gonna be 4 seismics. And now we're back to the default, and I would like to invite you to go through the entire thing. So, notes, obviously. There's like the Q&A stuff, you can read through that, and we're gonna start with, where are we? Leveling, right? So, we're gonna level with Poisonous Concoction, and you can find for leveling, I do have leveling runs, entire ones. I want to just in a second walk you through it really quickly, like in terms of progression for leveling. Like I said, it's going to be Poisonous Concoction, at least after Cobra Lash. Let's maybe get to something like leveling, right? Okay, perfect. So maybe let's quickly finish this one. You can have level uniques if it's not your first character. It's fine. I have no idea what leveling uniques are good or not. I'm just doing like, I'm trained in doing the campaign rather quickly, and I never use them. But if I would need to use one, or you say, hey, you have the opportunity, choose something, I would just take Wanderlusts. To be honest, that's like the ones I would get. I would color them already. This one's actually wrong. It needs to be blue. So already have an update, right? Triple green, blue, get these Wanderlusts. So you're faster, you can't be frozen, so you can open, strong boxes without dying. And you already have your 4-link ready. So that's like really cool, and you have some movement speed. Do that, right? Or don't. In terms of actually leveling, we're gonna use Cobra Lash. That's pretty easy. You can go ahead and Mule Splitting Steel, but for most people that's super annoying. Just use Cobra Lash until you get to Brutus. We're gonna have some movement skills. We obviously have precision. It's really good to get that. Keep it at level 1 and only increase the level if you need it later with Poisonous Concoction. Right? If your hit chance isn't high enough. Sometimes people say hit chance doesn't matter for Poisonous Concoction, but I don't think it's true. It's just straight up not true. You do need hit chance for that. It's an attack. So I don't know. Yeah, keep this at level 1 early, right? Because it increases your mana reservation. Only increase if you actually need it. You can get shield charge super early. It's like really cool. You can delay this for a little bit if you have like mana issues or something like that. But shield charge is super, super nice. Also keep in mind you can only use shield charge. That's why we put it here. Nice. Good point. You get it after Brutus, and you can only use it once you have a shield. So probably during Corpulash you don't have a shield. So let's put this here. As soon as you kill the pirate, you're going to have Poisonous Concoction ready to go. That's why you're looking for a free link early, right? You ideally want any some kind of shield, like any, to pick up to use with that, because you can no longer have any weapons equipped, like no main-hand weapon, right? It needs to be emptied a slot, and in a shield slot there can be a shield if you wanted to. The skill still works if you don't have one, right? But you cannot use shield charge then. You're gonna have Withering Step, which is kind of cool. I'm gonna add that. It's really good for bosses and stuff like that. Puts Wither on people, and Wither on people takes so much more chaos damage, and poison is chaos damage, by the way. So that's basically your Act 1 experience. In Act 2, in terms of upgrades, Herald of Agony, some Skitterbots. That's like Act 2, you get some auras here. You can get Blood Rage, you can also skip Blood Rage. If you find it annoying to press it and you hate that it degens you, then just don't get it. It's totally fine, right? No worries with that, but frenzy charges are really nice, so consider it. In Act 3, there's going to be 4-link time, right? So you get unbound elements, ideally. You can also have faster attacks here or some other green gem if you really wanted to, but ideally you have like a triple green, 1 blue. Somewhere at some point, we're going to get curses, in this case spare. Don't think temp chains from the beginning, even though the slow is nice. Plague Bearer, your AoE ability. Also something about Plague Bearer which is really interesting is if you actually read the gem. So where is it? Bum 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 bum. Oh yeah, the last line. While infecting, deals chaos damage per second equal to %. Oh wait, that's not the one. Oh, there you go. The less damage with poison. There it is, right? So activating it also makes you deal more damage or no longer dealing less damage, right? Like Plague Bearer is the thing where you turn it on and then it collects like poison from poison damage you deal, and then you can get it out in like a long burst, like a Righteous Fire aura around you. Just keep that in mind. So don't be too lazy with activating it if you really need the damage, because you're constantly dealing less damage there, right? Okay, cool. That's just about Plague Bearer. Obviously, aura's still there. You can already get Grace, which is a really good idea. Act 4, next upgrade here in terms of skills is just Greater Volley. You swap Volley for Greater Volley. You can also earlier go for way more projectiles, but keep in mind, it costs you a lot of life plus there, right? So after that, not much is happening actually anymore. You could get increased area of effect in Act 6, right? Shield charge is the same, Grace is the same, and you can drop at some point Precision. And that's basically leveling done, right? If you take a look at the note section, there's kind of everything explained about the leveling thing. There's even more in the actual leveling guide, so I don't want to go over it like crazy. You go this way. There's also the trick with not killing Kitaba and making sure you run heist contracts first. You can do that, and little notes about the different acts. They're not too heavy here, but there also isn't too much to know actually at this point. So peeking in early maps. You're gonna arrive in maps. You're still gonna play Poisonous Concoction. Also, by the way, at this point, you're gonna play Poisonous Concoction for quite a while, because swapping earlier to Seismic, it just doesn't feel good, and I just can't recommend it. You can do it whenever you want, but I would just not recommend that you do that. Actually, would be staying Poisonous Concoction until probably like 85. Like level 85 is pretty good. It isn't too hard to get. You just run white maps. You need to completion anyway. You're gonna run a little bit, like to get to 85 or even 80. You probably want to start doing some yellow maps, because other than that, it's XP just isn't good enough anymore. But you're gonna progress there anyway, and yellow maps are still fine. And then you have basically 2 phases where you're gonna play Poison Concoction maps until like 85, and that's when you trap swap. So how does that look like? Basically, you kind of go like this, or we can go over the leveling tree real quick, right? Because that's actually not that uninteresting. So the first tree here. Pretty simple, you get some damage, you get some life here, more damage, and then you start to actually get life if you kill enemies, which is really cool. And then you take this node, right? This one is enough. If you're less experienced, probably take this one as well. And that makes it so it solves your mana problems. You can have really little mana because every time you hit something, and you hit a lot with Poisonous Concoction, right? A lot of projectiles, hit a lot of stuff, a lot of mana back. Even though 2 doesn't sound too much, and you also get the leech there. Until then, mana is kind of a little bit annoying, right? You need a mana flask, and you should probably still have a mana flask after that, just in case you're like throwing stuff and you're not actually hitting anything. Keep 1 mana flask and keep 3 health flasks during leveling. 3 of them. 1 mana, 1 quicksilver. And make sure you upgrade your life flasks as well, right? Always have like a newer version of them. The only value that actually counts. Can we see this somewhere here? Okay, this recovers X. In this case, recovers 2,477. This number is the only number that counts for Poisonous Concoction. And there are some life flasks that, if you roll them in something, they will lower this number. Right, it might happen faster and has other benefits, but make sure this number is as high as possible, and that's the life flask you choose. All right, so yeah, mana sustain, fine. Upgrade your life flasks. Right, okay, do that. I said as soon as you arrive here, mana gets so much better. Really, really cool. We take some more life, and then we go into like poison chance on hit, and we get this 300% increased damage thing. Please keep in mind you change this later, way later, but at some point this mastery will change, and it's almost impossible to see in PoB. Just keep in mind that this changes. So after that, we should definitely, latest here, get some flask sustain. On the note of flask sustain, if you have 3 life flasks, then at bosses and stuff, you are going to run out. Very likely you're going to run out. It's not the end of the world if you're out. You're still dealing damage. It's significantly less, yes, but you typically deal so much damage anyway that it doesn't really matter. And worst case, if you're not that familiar with the bosses, you're not going to have a life flask to heal yourself, and you might die at a boss, and then you just walk back in and kill him because your flask refill. So not a big deal. Can be annoying. Just be aware it's normal that this can happen very early on. It's not going to be that much of a case a bit later, but might happen. That's also why we have 3 life flasks. If that's too annoying for you, you could try having 4 life flasks and skipping the mana flask, if that's more comfy for you. Once you have these nodes, you can even do that. Right, so flask sustain, more life on hit. These nodes are somewhat overkill, but they're also so nice, right? You have like life on hit here, you have life leech here on hit, or basically attack damage, then more life on hit, way more life on hit, and then you have some base recovery. So while you're fighting stuff, it feels amazing because you just like hit a pack of monsters and your life goes like multiple times your life. It feels like you get back at least once, like you just shoots up. Really, really cool. Reservation stuff here. Then this node, right? Okay. Take this node. This node is going to haunt you for the rest of playing this build, because every time in game you check how high, like later on in the build when we get spell suppression, way later on. But every time you check in game if your spell suppression is at 100% or not, then this node will mess you up, because it says you get 10% extra while you're on full life, and the game only tells you up to 100%. So if you build correctly, you have 110% while you're on full life or more, but the game in-game doesn't tell you. It's just going to say 100, right? So, and if you actually have 100 or 101, 102 in-game, and you lose even a tiny bit of life, you lose 10% chance to, for spell suppression chance. And that's especially dumb. I mean, it's in generally a bit dumb, because most of the time you're not going to be spell suppression capped and you're going to die. You have like a 10% chance to die to spell damage. You really don't want that. And even more of a problem is because we're using exsanguinate, and exsanguinate costs life. So while we are fighting, we are constantly not on full life. It's just always a tiny bit missing. So don't get baited by this node. Don't troll yourself. Read this node, understand the node. You can test in-game. How do you test in-game? Very easy. Oh, this game is still there. You go here, and right now it says 100%. And if I throw this exsanguinate things, right, I lose life, and I'm still at 100%. That's when you're good. Right? That's when you're good to go. Maybe you can actually simulate this real quick. Can I remove some spell suppression somewhere? Oh, I can. Boop. So now I'm actually at 98. And I think like, I'm at 98%. No, I'm not. I'm at 88 as soon as I throw something. That's like really important. And I've seen so many POBs and helped out so many people on the Discord with their POB. And figuring out, oh, why are you dying? And almost every single time this node was selected, and it just trolled people, right? So very dangerous node. Please, please, please keep it in mind. So you're not gonna randomly die all the time, even though you shouldn't. Next up, where are we going next up? Oh yeah, E4. Perfect. This node here, it's pretty nice, but it is very conditional, right? So just make sure you can select it, but keep in mind that it has some requirements. It's pretty nice to have this extra 15% already. And why not? Just like conditional node. Just keep that in mind. It's just a conditional node. Did I forget anything? Oh yeah, I forget it. Did I skip one? Oh yeah, we go down here. And that's the next one. Okay, perfect. So we go up a bit here. It's dex and int, which is kind of cool. There's damage over time stuff here. And here's precision ones. This one sounds kind of weird, but it's way better than the other one that says you get more for the dexterity. Get this one early, this node. It's really, really good. And in this case, you can, as soon as you have that, right, you can check your in-game thing, in-game hit chance, for poisonous concoction, and decide to drop precision maybe, right? Maybe you want to keep precision around, but maybe not have it active, have it somewhere in your offhand or something. But as soon as you hit this, you're probably fine without precision, right? Saves you a socket and some mana reservation, so you can get that. So getting further, now there we get spell suppression, as set conditional. Just check your gear. Can you actually use it? If yes, you can allocate it already. If not, maybe delay it until you actually have the items. If you at some point then doing leveling change the items and it's not active anymore, it's totally fine. Don't refund it. Don't spend your refund points on it. If you have it allocated, leave it. It's gonna be fine later on. Other than that, we go up here, solving a lot of like intelligence stuff, getting a bit more life, more reservation stuff. So you can run more auras, and that's all a bit easier. And then we get here, and that one is really interesting because it allows you to have like 2 curses, right? And that's already like level 60, like end of campaign. 2 curses. Oh, this one's the one. 2 curses, really cool. So despair and temporal chains, which is really nice. Curse mastery also really, really important because it gives you chance to poison for cursed enemies. It's conditional, but you're gonna poison the things that are worth having 100% chance to poison. So don't worry about it. Really nice node. Very, very, very powerful, I would say. And that's probably, oh, there's a last one, right? Oh yeah, a bit more leveling onto 66 then. Since typically people following this guide, they end up mostly actually at level 70 plus finishing a campaign. Compared to when I do it, I typically finish more like level 62. A bit of a difference there. However, either during the campaign still or a bit later, you can get an additional projectile for Poison's Concoction, which is kind of cool, and much of attack speed, and more accuracy, right? So you solve the problem with like not hitting enough, essentially, and again, might be able to get rid of precision entirely if you get this. So that seems to be worth it quite a bit. And then we are already getting into early maps on like a 75 character. So that's leveling entirely. Explained to some degree, I hope. Early maps, as said already, let's also do this in terms of the tree and everything else. So this is already in early maps. Okay, cool. We basically have like 2 trees, and before we swap to traps. The first one is giving us a bunch of damage here, like damage over time, skill effect duration kind of things, even though skill effect duration is only useful for Seismic Trap actually, but everything else here is quite useful. These are also quite useful. Nodes over here, and you get a jewel socket here. Obviously, get that if you have a jewel to put in. There is, I think, in the next step already. Oh, did I put it? Where are you? Is it on this one? Let's put it in here. There's like this really cool jewel. It's this one. Oh, basically, let's show it here, wherever it is. If you can get your hands on any gem that has corrupted blood cannot be inflicted on you, no matter what anything else on a gem says, unless it somehow breaks the build, but I don't think there's anything. Be a bit careful with unique gems. Sometimes they do weird stuff. Just the first line. It's a corrupted implicit, so you need to be a corrupted jewel. You can find it on the market. Any of them makes your life so much easier because you don't die to corrupted blood anymore. So that's one of the first things I typically do in a league. As soon as I can, I have like a vendor search alert thing on the trade website, and as soon as there's a cheap one, I'm just gonna buy it and be done with corrupted blood for the entire league. Really liking that. Ideally, a bit later than another note on there that is really cool early on, or then forever, is having 30% or more reduced chill effect. Right? We're gonna go over that a bit later as well. Why that it's important, but that's like already an amazing jewel. Very helpful, very comfy. That's basically all we swap to here, and then later for preparing trap swap, if you have a look at that number here, let's move this a little bit so you can see what changes. I like this kind of back and forth swapping here. We go down here, get Mage Bane, and we get this spell suppression stuff, including the lucky node, right? And including the lucky, this puts us very early without anything on gear towards like a 90% spell suppression chance, which for early mapping is fine. Totally fine. I feel like it's good enough. And maybe somewhere on your gear randomly, you're going to find some percent, and this is getting better and better. So yeah, this is already obviously getting towards the 80s. It's just getting some spell suppression from the tree, which is pretty cool. In terms of links in here, what you're going to have is still 4-link. I'm just going to assume you're not going to have a 5-link or anything. You can play around with either having void manipulation or live tab, or maybe not this one in void manipulation. Like, it's a bit of a back and forth. Live tab is in case you're too uncomfortable with mana, because on that setup you don't have much mana, right? And it should be fine because you're getting it back by hitting stuff and everything. But if that's for some reason is like super annoying for you and you don't feel comfy and you just hate that, get live tab in your links, right? If you're in trade league, you might be able to easily buy a 5-link. Just have both, right? Just say like, okay, I'm gonna spend a few chaos. Maybe you can do that. It's totally fine to get like a corrupted chest or something that isn't terrible, and at the same time just gives you these 5 colors, right? So keep that in mind. It's definitely an option, either in addition or to change something. Don't change the greater volley really in that case. So much about that. Cool. Plague Bearer, really cool thing. We're gonna put that in a ring, and I'll tell you in a second why. And there's no longer, you can also go the increased area of effect, but then you cannot use the ring, right? Because ring I only have one socket. Still gonna have Plague Bearer. That's your main clearing thing, by the way. After entering maps, right? You're just gonna throw your poisonous concoction things basically to keep yourself alive, because it gives you life regen and mana and stuff. And to charge Plague Bearer, then you can turn on Plague Bearer and just run through everything and just in between throw a little bit to stay alive. So it's more like a Plague Bearer character than an actual Poison Concoction character, but fair enough. Shield Charge for Zumi Zumi, really, really cool. Withering Stab, so you can wither things and deal significantly more damage. Flame Dash, because Shield Charge doesn't go over ledges and kind of things. It gets stuck everywhere. Then you have Temporal Chains and Despair. I highly recommend you self-cast it at this point, right? So, because it's so much quicker to self-cast it. This whole Arcanist Brand thing is super slow. It has a slow cast speed, and then it needs to appear the brand, and then it needs to apply one curse, and then it needs to apply another curse. That's cool for bossing and stuff later on, and fine, but for like this early mapping kind of thing, honestly, just put Despair and temporal chains on different buttons, and if you find normal monsters and you feel like you need to curse them because they are yellow, then throw Despair. If they still somehow live, okay, curse them again with the other one. And for bosses, it's also fine to do. It's like 2 buttons. It's way quicker than the other one. Very, very comfy, I feel like. Especially the difference is if you have Arcanist Brand at the stage in, during mapping, normally you're not going to curse anything because it takes so long to do. So it's way better to have a quick Despair than no curse at all. And in terms of auras, I highly recommend you take these 3 and you don't take Skitterbots, right? So you can, right, swap one of these, right? Maybe Determination, maybe Grace. Probably Determination if you really wanted to. But I highly recommend you don't do that, and you get Skitterbots in and just gives you significantly more damage. It's just how it is. But run with these, don't kill yourself. In terms of items early on, so something general about items I really would like to mention at this point, as at least the people that watch the entire thing can hear it, is it's really difficult to put items in different stages into PUB and make sure people understand why that is. I have in a few stages, a few items like very specific things. I tried to put this into the notes, like big time into the notes here, right? On what I think about different items and slots. But there's also this sense of, like, I don't know, if you look at this shield here, right? What does it say? You can see this is a armor evasion shield, right? The type of shield is important, the type of stats on it, because you get like base stat. If you use an energy shield here, or pure armor one, then you're missing other stats, or you just have an evasion one, then you have even less armor than you already have. So the type is kind of important. The specific base, like being any elegant round shield or anything, is less important. And obviously, the better the base is, the better for you, right? At this stage, it doesn't matter all that much yet, right? You take anything, right? You would even initially take something that has like the wrong, it doesn't have armor evasion, maybe, right? But just keep in mind that I kind of want you to take the type of base I put into the PUB, like in this case armor evasion, and get a high base of that over time, especially in later phases. You definitely want to tier the second highest base, maybe even the highest. If you craft something yourself, please take the highest base and make sure it's a correct base and it doesn't have the wrong stats. It really makes a huge difference in your flat armor and evasion. So about that, right? So the other thing is obviously implicit in this case at this stage already, still doesn't matter yet, but below there's a shield that has exactly 55 life, 30 fire res, and 29 cold res. What I mean by that is I want you to have a shield that has ideally life and some resistance. So it doesn't need to be cold and fire here. It doesn't need to be exactly these values. On this entire geese set here, if you look down here, I currently have pretty much enough resistance all over the place here to slightly overcap here. And that's what you need to do. You need to cap your resistance. You don't need this very specific one, and you don't need these very specific values. It's just basically a placeholder for, hey, get life and resistances here, as many as you can, obviously. It's always good. And 2 typically, like 1 life roll, 2 resistance is very achievable. You should be able to get something like that. Same with the helmet, life and some resistance rolls. Your chest piece, life and some resistance rolls. If you go for like a corrupted 5-link, maybe you want to buy a 5-link, then maybe it just has life and 1 resistance. That's okay, but you're trading, right? Then you need other pieces to have more resistance, but you're getting a 5-link out of it. That's why chest is always a bit more flexible, because you could get links instead. Gloves. They're not entirely mandatory, but I highly recommend these gloves. That's where your Poisonous Concoction gets in, because then becomes a 5-link, interestingly enough. Also has some increased poison duration, added chaos damage, has some chaos resistance. So they're all over the place. Really good gloves for early mapping. Should be very, very cheap to acquire. If you can't, fine. Take rare gloves, life, resistance, be fine. In terms of boots, again, life, resist, but also movement speed. Again, if you can't get all that much movement speed, or you can only get movement speed with a little bit of resistance, no problem. Make something else have more resistance to compensate. Amulet. That one is a bit more specific. So, I'll tell you why. Because attributes on this build, you need strength and you need intelligence. You don't get all of that from tree, and you need quite a bit of that, right? Especially for later on, for the trap swap, right? What I try to do here is I fix resistances to very specific items. So in this case, I want you to get strength, and your majority of intelligence that you need in the nodes are the exact values that you need somewhere in the nodes. You probably got to read them. Where is it? Doesn't matter. It's somewhere in here. If you read through it, you find it. You get these exact amounts. So you get intelligence here, and also on the belt. Like, this belt has a lot of strength, because I really want you to fix your strength and intelligence with these two items. Main reason for that is if you get an amulet and your belt and you're missing intelligence. But you say it's fine, I have some on my helmet. What that means is if you get an helmet upgrade later on and it's a great helmet, but it doesn't have intelligence anymore randomly, then you need to swap other items just because of attributes. And that is so annoying and really tilts people, especially if you're a bit less experienced. It's gonna bite you into situations where you can't really change any gear pieces anymore without also changing a lot of other ones and making them very expensive. So I much rather fix them to here. Like in this case, I want you to have a amulet with a lot of intelligence, some strength that in combination with the belt meets your strength and intelligence requirements based on the nodes. So that's what you do. If you on top of that get life and some resistance, really cool, right? Like this one with intelligence, life, double resist, and pretty high resists might already be really difficult, but it's fine. You just need in total enough resistance. And but mandatory here is the intelligence, the attributes. Let's skip to the belts, because same thing here. Mandatory here is to fix together with the amulet your attributes. If that's fine and you still have space for life and maybe even resistance, cool, go for it, right? Obviously, these two uniques here put some pressure on your resistances because you have 2 less slots. So other things need to be planned accordingly. Here, in this case, it's a resistance ring, mainly, right? Resistances, life, that's it. Get as much as you can, make sure you're capped. This ring is pretty funny. It says +5 to socket to gem. That's why we put Plague Bearer in there. It just makes Plague Bearer significantly stronger. Also, it takes longer to charge it, I believe. But yeah, it's kind of a funny ring. Also, absolutely not mandatory. If you would rather have the bigger size or something on Plague Bearer, you can get the ring. It's fine, right? So, in terms of flasks, I did take for the end game one, but they are actually pretty easy to make. I like, for my life flasks, I like instant recovery when on low life. So you can press it if you're missing just a little bit. And whenever you're actually on low life, that means below 50%, I believe, it just shoots you up, and get your anti-bleed flask there. Just have it there, get the muscle memory. If you're bleeding to death, you just press the life flask and you're no longer bleeding to death, which is really cool. Other than that, I like a second divine flask here. Somehow roll it to have more recover X% X life. Get some effects on it already if you want. Jade plus granite makes your like resistance or your basically your survivability significantly better in terms of armor and evasion. Quicksilver obviously to move fast, and as I said earlier, as soon as you can get a corrupted blood jewel. You still need this, right? You still need this for normal bleeds at this stage, but corrupted blood is kind of done. That's early maps. And then we're already getting to trap swapping. Already, level 85 or something. Let's switch everything to the trap swap. So, what changes? I mean, obviously you're gonna become a trapper. Let's move this here. Before you do that, oh please God, before you swap to traps, do your labyrinths, all of them. You're 85, okay? So get these, right? You can already get them during the campaign, but the only use case during the campaign or before you use traps is the immunity to ignite and shock, which is valuable. It's really valuable, but you don't strictly have to do it. I highly recommend to do it very early during the campaign before killing Kitaba. But in case you skipped it for some reason, before you swap to traps, take your Poisonous Concoction dude that is like 80, 85 or something by now, and just do these 2 labs, minimum, ideally, also before you swap. Already get like clockwork. It's like the last one. Like if you swatch this, right? Just get it done. That's Überlap. If you're like a level 85 or something, you can do Überlap. It's not a problem. Again, doesn't really help us all that much until we are using traps, right? So that being said, just don't forget about it, because it's really annoying if you swap to traps and then you don't have the labs and then you don't have the recovery and then your traps don't actually chain or like don't explode all of them. It's really bad. Don't do that. Other than that, the trap swap itself, now we need to zoom out even more because so much is changing, is basically a lot of regrets, right? We're getting rid of all the projectile stuff, of all the precision, because we're no longer attacking anything. We're not having unhit effects. We don't need that many life flask stuff anymore. Direction. What are we getting? We're getting trap nodes, right? More suppression stuff as well, but we get this trap node, really cool one. This one is absolutely mandatory, because if you don't have it, then your seismic trap has one less use, which is really bad. We're also getting more, we're getting Eldritch Battery. Hope I don't forget to talk about Eldritch Battery in a second. We're getting spell chance to poison there. Keep in mind, Seismic Trap is a spell. Traps are spells and not attacks. So everything regarding spells works with them to an extent. That's really, really kind of important. More trap stuff here and this duration stuff here. This sounds like, oh, poison duration is good, blah, blah, blah. This doesn't affect poison duration. It affects how long your seismic trap is on the ground. That's why we're getting this. And then you sometimes have the weirdest POBs. I did that once. There's like a very old POB of mine I released that was actually taking these nodes without traps. Like, because I don't know, they feel so natural, but they're actually not doing anything if I'm not correct. And some more resistance there. Other thing regarding traps. I already said they are spells. And there are in the game on-kill effects. So, and on-kill effects do not work with traps. But, and that's huge actually, it does work with damage over time effects that were applied from traps. So poison. You have an enemy and the enemy dies from your shield charge. Then you get the on-kill effect, right? Because you did that. If it somehow dies, because, example, Poison's Seismic Trap does have a hit effect as well, right? It deals a tiny amount, but it deals some damage while hitting. If somehow a monster dies from this hit of the trap, you will not get the on-kill effect because the goddamn trap killed it. So, if your trap, by hitting something, applies poison, and the monster dies, like the last tick of damage, whatever killed the monster, if I see this correctly, is poison, was the poison damage, then you do get the on-kill effect. Because for some technical limitation, essentially, it technically was the trap still because it applied to poison, but in technical terms, that game doesn't work like that, or they can't make it work like that, or don't want to invest that stuff to do it. So it means that kill is attributed to you again. Means stuff like this here actually works again, like per enemy killed, on kill effects work. So for example, is this one as well? Yeah, this one down here, gain onslaught for 4 seconds on kill, would work in my opinion, because if it dies from poison over time or damage over time effects attributed to you. So that's like an interesting little thing. It's a little bit of a quirky thing with traps for that. So we switched everything. Did we switch everything? I think I did. Cool. So for seismic, ideally you get a 5 link, right? Maybe you can do that, maybe you can't. If not, get a 4 link, at least get a decent body armor, right? So you have some stats on it. You're probably able to get a 5 link by this time. For exsanguinate, you wanted to link with trap, with chain, cluster traps, because you have a lot of these traps and they chain out to hit a lot of things, and you want to make it into a trap in the first place. You cannot self-cast this, it doesn't work. If you feel like you want to boost your exsanguinate damage and you have space in terms of resist and everything on your other gear, you could get Deerstalkers. So unique boots, and they already have trap support built in. So you just socket exsanguinate in there. Still cluster traps, so have a lot of these traps. Still chain, so chains, like these tendrils chain. And you can add all unbound elements, and that increases your exsanguinate damage by quite a bit. So you could do that if you feel like you want to try that. Other than that, we have Herald of Agony, Grace Determination, and we do have Withering Step in here, so we can still wither stuff. We get Shield Charge, faster attacks, and we have Divine Blessing, Malevolence. And that's a bit weird, right? Because Divine Blessing makes it so this aura here basically is temporary. It's this stuff, right? It's this here. You press it, so now I have Malevolence, but you're only gonna have this for like 20 seconds, and then it's gonna turn back off. But what it does, it removes this energy shield here. I can get to a second why there's energy shield, right? So it's like, it costs a lot. It costs 512 to do this for some time. And that's what this does, right? How do we get the energy shield there? I'm gonna talk about that in a second. So it's like a temporary aura kind of thing. You can just press every 10-20 seconds, or if there's a big monster, and then be fine. We do have Temporal Chains and Despair with Arcanist Brand. Outside of the bossing setup, I highly recommend you don't use Arcanist Brand. Just single custom and prioritize always Despair first, Temporal Chains second, unless you want to be a bit safer than Temporal Chains first, because it's also, yeah, right. This less action speed is actually insane. We have Molten Shell or Wall Molten Shell if you want the extra button with cast when damage taken. Even though we don't have too much armor, it still gets you down to like, I don't know, a bit, and a 500 to 1000 shield. You could also probably do some other defense skills. There's like Arctic Armor, I believe, and some other things. So you can choose, mix and match there. Flame Dash, so we get over other things, and we have Monster Explosions on kill, but we're gonna talk about that in a second. Let's talk about Eldritch Battery. So here, it's a keystone. It sells, spend energy shield before mana, Kling's really complicated. The only thing is, typically energy shield is here, and now it protects your mana, right? So if you get hit, this doesn't help you because it's not protecting your life pool. But what it does is, if I spend, let's spend Exsanguinate, right? This is not moving because Exsanguinate costs health, and this is not protecting it. But if I use Seismic, for example, then it's gonna use that. So it uses that. It's basically a mana pool, right? And that's what, oh god, this is horrible. That's what Eldritch Battery does. So that's kind of the idea. Also means we can reserve pretty much all our mana, which is really, really nice. So that's why we have it. That has some consequences in terms of gear. So in order to use your stuff, especially Malevolence, because it's so expensive, right? In order to be able to do that, you need to have energy shield. And we're going to solve this on 2 exact items. Again, I want to fix solutions to items, so it's a bit easier to handle everything. And it's going to be your helmet. You want a helmet that has, in total, 150-ish, 140, 150-ish energy shield on it, including like the stats at the bottom, right? This one has like 60-ish% increased energy shield, and as a hubris cycle, that turns out to be 146 energy shield, including quality already. So whatever you do with the helmet, have 140, 150 energy shield on it. Ideally get some life and resistance as well. Second item, it's one of the uniques you wanted to gather for or collect before the trap swap. It's this fancy shield here. Main reason it's in the build, honestly, is because I really like the shield. I just think it's funny and I like it, so I'm going to incorporate it. And it has a lot of energy shield already built in. This shared suffering thing doesn't do anything, don't worry about it. It has some life and increases the duration of elements and a little bit of block. Also a bit of spell suppression, actually. So these two items, 140, 150 here, just this item. Maybe quality it if you want to, and get a decent version of it, right? Of the percentage. Alone, they solve energy shield forever for you. If you keep this, no longer any energy shield problems, right? Cool. So, obliteration. The wand. If you see all the stuff, just keep in mind, some leaks ago they changed the base. So now it has 188% int. 188 int requirement, no longer 155, I think it was, or something. It's an imbued wand now and it was not earlier. So in case that it's confusing at some point. Incredible wand, to be fair. Incredible weapon. Versus extra chaos is amazing. And there's a 20% chance of stuff to explode, right, and deal some of their max life as damage. It's so good for clear. And I know people are going to use cold iron points for mapping because the POB number is bigger and bosses feel a bit better and yellows feel a bit better. But honestly, it's not the way to go. It's obliteration. You need those explosions for mapping. At least give it a try. It's just better in any regards. But as you want, however you want to do it, do as you please. Body armor, again, 4-link, 5-link, maybe ideally already. Life resist, whatever you can get. On gloves, they're still the same. Are they actually still the same anyway? Yeah, basically, yeah. Life resist, Dragonstyle boots, again, have movement speed. Life resist is kind of cool. Your amulet here, I didn't say that earlier, but even during Peaconk early stuff already, you want to anoint this. Toxic strikes, right? Gives you 15% chance to poison. It's really good. Not really necessary during Peaconk because Peaconk has inherently 40%, but still fine. You need it, definitely need it or want it for Exsanguinate and Seismic. But it also has 15% damage over time multiplier. So as soon as you have an amulet that kind of is good enough, right? It has the attributes, it has maybe life and resist, and kind of just slap this anoint on. Clear oils, you're gonna find yourself easy enough if you just do any blight. Ember, probably you're gonna get one as well. It's easy enough to get. So the only thing you really have to buy is probably the Crimson, which costs like 4 Chaos Orbs. So it's really cheap. You're gonna be able to afford it. Just keep this on your amulet. There's no excuse for not doing that. Yeah, other than that, same amulet. We're gonna get a ring called Mink's Heart. That one is not strictly mandatory, obviously, but just get one, right? They can be somewhat expensive on the very first day of the league, maybe 2 days. Then they're sometimes like even like a bit of weaker versions can be 20C or something I've seen already. But I don't think with even more nerfs, poison is going to be that popular. So they're probably going to be fine. And then after a few days, typically you should get them for, I don't know, maybe 5C or something. So they will be affordable. Let's put it that way. You're going to manage to get one of those. Ideally, have a look if you get a lot of gain X% of physical damage as extra chaos. That's the value you want to look for and optimize for. Also here, same thing. The gain percent, like physical as extra chaos damage, is the value you want to optimize for in those. Still same ring, Rife, fixing resistance. Still a bunch of uniques that do not have resistance. So you pretty much have still the same pressure. Ring already didn't have any before. Your shield had some, but your gloves didn't at that point, so that's just swapping, right? So every other gear should be still in place and still fine. Same with the belt, still your strength on it. Same requirements as before you swap the traps, so you don't need too much new gear. Let's look at the notes. That's basically for trap swapping, right? Yeah, here's like all again, like all the things you kind of need. Here's also an entire article about chance to poison, how you get chance to poison. You get it from the tree in our case, so it's like it works out perfectly. And don't worry too much if you don't have 100% immediately. It's not a big deal. Obviously, it's like a more multiplayer, and I get that, but in practice, you don't need this immediately. You're going to be fine. So, phase 1 and 2. Let's see what changes here. Trap swap and phase 1 is still the same. Sometimes these are for multiple phases, so I'm not going to change the tree here to talk about phase 1, but I have to change it here. And in terms of items, I don't change it either. So the only thing we realize that changes is basically our gem setup. So here we actually have a 5 link now. Good job. Don't need a 6 link yet. We have a bossing setup, which we're going to talk about. This is the same. These should be the same. Malevolence, Divine Blessing, the same. Still use this or don't. And everything else should also be the same. So basically get a 5 link, to be honest, and add your bossing setup, right? Add your bossing setup. So what does that mean? It's a bit confusing, but instead of bossing, also if I say bossing, I mean really pinnacle bosses, like big ass pinnacle bosses, not map bosses or something, right? You can always swap to it if you struggle for some reason with some whatever monster you're facing, but you don't need to. And the idea is we're using Blade Trap instead of Exsanguinate. We have cluster traps, so we throw a lot of them. We're gonna put Withering Touch on it, so the Blade Trap actually applies Wither to our enemies, and then we're gonna increase the duration of the whole situation. So that's kind of the point here. You're not gonna have Exsanguinate in that case, so you don't have a clear skill doing bossing, which is also totally fine. So just swap these out. As you can see, they have the same colors, so they can just go into the same boots. One other thing you need to do is swap your wand to any dagger or anything that works with Blade Trap, right? You cannot keep the wand because Blade Trap does not work with wands. Ideally, you get a cold iron point, right? It doesn't have the explosions, but we are fighting a boss, so we don't need clear explosions. And it deals significantly more damage than Obliteration, single target. So get one of those. Also, very, very early in the league, I've seen them for 60C or something, and then they typically drop heavily, especially if they are not high in demand. You're going to be able to afford one, and by the time you're going to face a pinnacle boss. If you can't, right, look for any melee weapon that works with Blade Trap that maybe has +1 physical on it. And that's it. Doesn't need more. You're going to find something. Worst case, use a Vendor Dagger, because the weapon damage doesn't matter here. Cool. So that's what changes there. Then you have a bossing setup. Not much else actually changing. So towards phase 2, that one's a good one. I like that one. Phase 1, phase 2, right? You see the difference probably is we are no longer lucky here. We take some stuff here, we take some stuff there, and level shoots up quite a little bit, right? So we get into our 90s, we get a little bit of life back. That's the point here. Skills do not change, correct, but the gear changes, right? And not too little, actually. So that means, in this case, it's pretty much the same, isn't it? Yeah, it's still very, very close to that, basically. Is a hubris thing, ideally, probably actually have life and resistance by this point here. Still 150 on our chest. Is where overall we're going to try to incorporate spell suppression into our gear. You do need 35% between your chest piece, your gloves, and your boots. However you distribute that doesn't really matter. If you don't manage, because spell suppression gear can be a bit tricky. If you also want life and also want some resistance, at least, can be a bit tricky, right? If that's the case, right, you can opt to maybe have a little bit less life for some time or something like that. And these nodes here, these have 4% each. These are really high value nodes, I think. So it's totally fine to take these, right? Make sure to do that. You cannot really use these 15% here anymore as soon as you have a pure energy shield helmet. So in that case, it just kind of falls off, right? If you somehow manage to get an energy shield evasion base, then you can use that stuff again, right? But getting enough energy shield on those bases is a bit tricky. So it's something to consider. But I mean, it's like the first gear upgrades that actually matter here a bit, and they're a bit trickier to get. Somehow, get enough spell suppression between these. Body armor typically has a lot, and I believe the 17% chance thing is not even that high of a tier. Where is it? 2 out of 3. Full Dragon Scale. This is a tier 3. Oh, it's actually a tier 2 roll already. Yeah, so tier 2. It's not a tier 1 roll, so might be a bit tricky to get. However, if you get somehow a little bit more on these others, that's fine. As I typically do, I check the chest first. I see what's like the highest suppression chest I can get that still makes sense within like a very cheap budget. Like, I don't know, make a decision there first, because the worst thing would be if you get your gloves and your boots already, and then you need a specific value on the chest, and it also needs to be 5 link, and you know, do the chest last, I would say, and see first, hey, what can I get on gloves, right? Can I maybe even get an implicit there, spell suppression implicits, stuff like that. Again, some spell suppression, I believe these are actually tier 3 now, and live and resist as you need it. Also in this gear set, you already see we are quite overcapping on resistance, so you have a bit more space on boots, suppress, live, and some resistance. What I kind of like here is either 20% increased movement speed craft with cannot be chilled. If you don't have upgraded, if you don't have a anti-chill gem and you haven't upgraded your Pantheon yet, then this can be cool. So you're just no longer chilled. You can also get a thing, which we get later anyway, is the one that gives you onslaught on kill, which is also really cool to get. So yeah, I kind of like that. And typically spell suppression, life, and a bit of resist with open prefix is not as expensive as getting flat movement speed with everything else. So that's like really cool. You just need open prefix because you can craft this. Should be a bit easier to get. Amulet, still the same, essentially. Life and resist if you can, but you need to fix your attributes. Wings heart stays the same. The ring question. Yeah. So how to put that? It got something to do. I show you in game, right? So I don't have an unset ring here, for example, because it's just difficult to get a good ring and also have it be an unset ring. That's always difficult. So what I opted for right now is during, let's assume actually this is no longer nerfed, I could use this. This would be essentially my mapping setup, right? I have both curses. I'm gonna manually actually cast them, and Withering Stab could be over here or other way around, doesn't really matter. And Skitterbots, there's still space for Skitterbots now, and Withering Stab could be, for example, here. So I do have the setup. So it means I no longer have Arcanist Brand going, but I would be running the setup here, and I do not need an unset ring. If I want Skitterbots and I want Arcanist Brand, I'm missing a socket. So I need a ring where I can put, for example, Withering Stab in. That would be neat for an unset ring. So I'm just going to run manual cursing, Skitterbots, and be fine. So, but if I get to bossing setup, then obviously I'm going to change all of these, but I'm going to change my weapon anyway. So if I like have a cold iron point that has, let's say, that has blue, blue, green, then I can just put in my Arcanist Brand again, and this is fine. And here, instead of Withering Stab in the last slot, let's put it that way. Here is always like a blue socket, and there is Skitterbots in there. Withering Stab would be over here, so it looks like this, right? So let's assume these are just the colors, right? Do I actually have a different weapon? Probably not. Any weapon? Perfect. This is a weapon now. Let's assume this is a weapon. And as soon as I swap the weapon, right, I can put them in here like this, right? Swapping back to this one. Whoops. Then I can just not have Arcanist Brand, but let's say this one fits in here. And yeah, like that. That was a really complicated explanation, I think. But you get the idea. So in that case, swapping to bossing setup means Arcanist Brand. Without bossing setup, no Arcanist Brand. And that's basically the idea. So you don't need an unset ring. So yeah, if you, oh Lord, if you don't like that, right? And you want these skills all the time, you want Arcanist Brand all the time, and you still want the Skitterbots thing, then you will need an unset ring. That's why it's here. So as soon as you choose not to have an unset ring here, it should be way easier to get even more resistance on a ring. If it's just life and resistance, it should be pretty easy. You could get an Amethyst ring, maybe even to somehow have more chaos resistance if that's what you care about. Belt, pretty much still the same. However, at latest there, you can do this as early as you want. Would be really cool to have this craft with regenerate 150 energy shield per second while rare or unique enemy is nearby. It really helps with sustaining energy shield, like if you use your big malevolence and throw a few traps, so it just like pumps you more energy shield in. Obviously, you need to have space to craft it. Other than that, still strength and life and resist as much as possible, but make sure you somehow get space for this specific craft here, right? So that's that phase, I believe. I hope I didn't forget anything. Holy. Phase 3 and 4, in terms of tree, there's a bit of an issue with levels by now. But you're getting into 96, that's pretty high. What you can do is you can swap off the bandit thing, that helps a little bit with it. And you can also choose to not take this, right? And choosing not to take this would be staying on a helmet. Maybe not exactly like this. Let me get to phase 3. I have one of those, but that's fine. Basically, the idea with this is we get this, we change the helmet, right? It's also the only difference here is just the helmet, right? So what it has now, it has an implicit, it's an Eldritch implicit, the Eater of Worlds one, I believe, that says 7% increased mana reservation efficiency of skills, and we do have this 10% mana reservation efficiency of skills on the item itself, which does come from an essence, right? It's not actually that fancy. It comes from these deafening essence of loathing. They are expensive early on, but you can take these and try to craft yourself a cool helmet, basically, with those. And then, you can still, you still have space for like a normal craft. So maybe you can craft an energy shield on it to fix that, to still be like high enough, or you craft a life, or you craft a resistance, but somehow get a helmet like this that still has 150 or ideally more energy shield. It has life, ideally also some resist, and has this essence thing, which is automatically gonna have. And that means, in combination with getting this stuff here, you can run, where is it? Here, you can run Skitterbots, right? If you don't have the item, these reservation things, and you don't have that, then you cannot run Skitterbots. And that is an option. To say, you know what? First of all, you have one less gem in your sockets. Pretty cool. And this might be a bit too complicated for you, or you say, I just don't, like, I'm not getting the level. It's too difficult. You don't want to use level carries, for example. Sometimes people do that. No shame in that. To get leveled somehow a little bit, to gain a bit more. But if that's like a big concern, or an intermediate step, that you cannot just not take these things, and you can also not replace it somehow, then it's totally an option to not have any of this reservation stuff on your helmet, not take these points, and just not have Skitterbots. Okay? That's totally fine. Like this, the character you've seen doesn't have Skitterbots. That's exactly what I did there. But mainly because I still had the duration of ailment thing. Also, this increased duration of ailments on enemies is also then an implicit you can get instead, which is technically better because it gives you some damage, right? So that's an option there in case especially the tree and stuff scares you off a little bit. Other than that, between these two, it's still the same gear, right? Maybe you already have it in that quality, maybe you're still working on it. Total cool. That's pretty much the only thing that changes. Also than that, anything here? No, we're just getting some of these like aura effect and the 8% thing. Just some more filling out the tree. It's also the same in phase 4. If we go here in terms of skills, the only difference, you can already see it here, right, is phase 4, get a 6 link by this time. And that also means, and that's the dangerous thing, we're gonna swap gear like a last time. This is end game gear for me, right? So there, if you make an end game chest, we're definitely gonna make sure it's a 6 link, right? So, here you have like actual endgame gear. Again, we are quite overcapped on resistance, so you do have some more space. Ideally, especially on endgame gear, but also a bit earlier, it's always cool if you're like 30% resistance overcapped. It's kind of nice, because then elemental weakness doesn't actually affect you anymore. You're still capped with it. So that's like a bit of a consideration, but I do also have like reduced curse effect on the flask, right? That's also really helpful, but it might not always be up. Other than that, here this would be like a kind of a fancy helmet where you want to run skitter bots. If you don't want to run skitter bots, then obviously you don't need to the essence craft. The helmet gets way cheaper because you can craft it differently and you get a different implicit. Also, there's like the lab enchant. I put that on there. That's the one I would probably get if I were you. No means necessary or anything, but yeah, if you can get your hands here on it, why not? Maybe you see a base that has it. Seismic is probably hugely unpopular, so maybe these are even cheap. We will see. Not sure if you ever get it on an energy shield base. Maybe it's actually cheap because somebody put it there on accident. I don't know. You can have a look out for that. So yeah, other than that, we're gonna add this craft with 8% of fist damage taken from it as fire. You can do this obviously earlier at some point. Really cool, really bolsters our physical damage reduction by quite a bit. Quite helpful. The chest piece looks super scary, and you can craft this completely yourself. In the Google document you find a old crafting video, still relevant. That's kind of part of the guide, was always, especially for newer players, that you're gonna go through these steps and you're gonna craft an end game item, right? You're gonna use end game crafting mechanics. It's more of it is typically cheaper to craft it than to buy it. So it's actually useful as well, and it's part a bit of the experience that if you're less experienced with the game, you have never actually beaten a pinnacle boss, and now you have beaten all of them, you have done your entire atlas, and now you get to craft your very own chest, which is like a really cool crafting process. To do that, it's quite expensive, obviously. Like it's by far the most expensive thing on the build. It's gonna run you, I don't know, 6 to 8, 10, 12, depending on your luck to bind. So it's a very endgame project that is not worth its price, right? If you're investing as soon as you're investing into a phase 4 gear, you're quite committed to the build in terms of just for the sake of you like it and you would like to bring it further. But you could also just stop and not do that. Just say, hey, why? I do have these like 20, 30 turbines now maybe lying around here, or I have a build that can just farm expedition or something. You can choose to just do that and then fund a very expensive different build with that money you're making, or you reinvest it into the build without getting back enough, essentially, as said, unless you're really interested in doing it just for the sake of fun and playing the video game. Then that's fine. It's just not efficient, just to be clear there. So yeah, you can craft this thing. Got a crafting video, really cool one. Good luck with that one. Obviously, make sure, I say it in a crafting video anyway, regarding base and everything. Then 6-link it. On the gloves, it's higher spell suppression here. We do have life and resists, obviously. We also have high spell suppression here, and we do have a bunch of it here. And yeah, and that Eldritch implicits, basically. You can just roll for them, pretty easy. Have some more spell suppression there to make that work and happen. I do no longer have spell suppression on my boots. That's a bit more of an option, but I just feel like in terms of boots, there's nothing wrong with having them there, right? You can have one less resist and have spell suppression there and have easier time with your gloves, right? That's totally fine. It might just be that if you have armor evasion boots on a high level base with like life, spell suppression, resist, and open prefix, might be significantly more expensive than having armor evasion boots with life, bunch of resistance, and open prefix, because it doesn't have spell suppression. Because armor evasion pieces typically are worth a lot if they do have spell suppression. So if you have one of the pieces in here, like maybe have more pressure on this one to have like a really high roll. But yeah, you can mix and match whatever's available to you. Amulet, getting a little bit more fancy there. Ideally, you still have the attributes on there, since this is kind of your final gear set. Maybe you're already finding random attributes somewhere where you have space. Just don't make the item worse with it. But yeah, you still need to have enough attributes on your amulet in combination with the belt. Keep that in mind. And ideally, you also have some life. And ideally, the important one is the +1 physical, by the way. That's the one you're looking for. That one is interesting. Obviously, you can get +1 physical and +1 all, and damage over time multiplayer, and attributes, and it's going to be insanely expensive. But I think this one might be achievable. If not, then just settle for the +1. That's fine, and maybe have some more resistance there, so it's not so much pressure on the other gear. Ming's Heart, obviously, kind of sweet thing. Maybe make sure your uniques have decent rolls by now, because there's no phase after that. But you can obviously you can on your uniques look for corruptions, maybe things like that, right? And also there's also catalysts. You can do tiny improvements with catalysts, but it doesn't seem worth it. In case of your ring, you either still have the unset ring or you just don't. Ideally you don't, so you have a easier time getting a better ring. Other than that, have chaos resistance or there, have normal resistance there live, and I really like this minimum endurance charges stuff. Helps out with physical resistance and stuff like that. Kind of a neat thing, I feel like. In terms of belt, that's a bit of a weird one as well. If you get trap throwing speed and these 200 energy shield, which is an unveil in this case, and maybe some life and resistance, that's really cool. You can obviously also try to get a Stygian Wise, right, and still fix your stats. You can play around with that. And yeah, also by the way, that this amulet got way higher in like attributes, and the belt got a bit less, right? It's less strength, and one of the reasons for that is by now you actually get these nodes here, and you may be even getting this node. You're probably not because of tree pressure, but you're getting a bit more strength randomly. And you might have a bit too much int, right? Like this specific amulet already has a bit of too much int, so I could save a bit on there. And maybe you in terms of dexterity with the new tattoos, you can move some attributes around there. Just be careful if you remove dexterity, it might affect your mage bane, and you're gonna drop with your spell suppression. Just keep that a little bit in mind, right? Where were we? So you could also go for a Stygian Wise, for example, would be cool, because it gives you another jewel socket, which is very, very, very powerful to have. Trap throwing speed is really cool on those. And also the 150 energy shield craft is also perfectly fine. Just keep that around. And yeah, other than that, there's flasks. This one talked about it earlier. I like low life, instant on low life. I like bleed on there. Other than that, in terms of flask, I like a quartz flask at all times, because it just gives you phasing. It's so much better. Game with phasing is so good. I obviously automate them also earlier already on this used when charges reach full. I don't want to press my flasks, so just do that. I get the gain 3 charges thing. Don't settle for 1 or 2 charges. Please go for 3. So these kind of recover over time, also during boss fights. I don't know. And over time, roll them, get a good implicit. One thing about flask is good flasks are expensive. Like if someone spends like 60 to 80 C on a flask, that's not crazy. And they're incredibly powerful, especially the suffix effects. Do not underestimate them. And if you have never done that, and maybe even played a few leagues and you've never really focused on Flask a bit, have a look on whatever build you're playing. Check out Flask and see how much power they can actually give you. It's insane. I do not mean unique flasks. I really just mean stuff like that, right? If you roll for them yourself, make sure you check item level. Item level requirements also matter for rolling flasks. Granite, obviously, so we die less. We do have a Stip Knight here, sort of a Jade, which is still perfectly fine, but that's mostly for the Unholy Might. Not necessary, but pretty good. Removing Burning doesn't do anything. And a Quicksilver with a bit more movement speed is also nice. Regarding the chill, here's a jewel, basically. That's like a full-on jewel. It got like still the corrupted blood, and it got the percent life, and still get the reduced chill effect. So corrupted blood plus reduced chill effect is important. Life is really cool. everything else is like a bonus, right? So get Corrupted Blood and Chill thing, and then see what else you can get over time, right? If you get a Stygian Vice, you can move the Corrupted Blood thing. You can also say, okay, whatever, I'm just gonna have a Bleed Flask and not have the Corrupted Blood. But jewels like that actually quite powerful. If you look at the specific one, it says here in this configuration that this is gonna this would remove 9% of our DPS. So yeah, bit of padding there maybe because of the fancy jewel, but it's an example, right? Get whatever you can. On the note of this chill thing, promised you I'm gonna talk about that. So Pantheons, really cool ones. Brine King, really cool. Don't get stun lock and die. I really like that. And if you upgrade them, right, you gain freeze immunity and reduced effect of chill. Really quickly on the freeze immunity. That's ailment immunity, right? Oops, I clicked something. Ailments. If you upgrade your dude here, the Major God, the Brine King, you are freeze immune. From the tree, where is it? Here. You are ignite and shock immune. So ailment immunity is solved. Just forget about it, basically. Or like the freeze, ignite, and shock, but not chill. And chill we're gonna solve as well. We get upgrade the dude as well, right? And go for 50% reduced effect of chill. And in combination with, I'm confused now, I almost cuffed myself to death. So, Brine King, 50%. And our jewel, the 30% here, I think it goes up to 35. You would have like 80 to 85% effect of chill. That's enough. It's good enough. You're not gonna really notice it anymore. And that makes us basically technically immune for that as well. There's also the smaller ones. I kind of like this one because it gives us your life flask, the life flask charges. It's more for boss fights and other things. You can choose other things there, but really, really liking that. Also here, the config is always be on Alira because you cannot change that based on phase or anything. I just really like Alira early on. It makes everything so nice. But at some point, there's also in the notes, you can switch this off, right? To getting +2 passive points. Just keep in mind, it does add more pressure to your resistance, but like on this gear here, with an unset ring, which makes stuff a bit tougher, basically overcapped, like in this case, high on fire. So you do have some wiggle room. Ideally, stay 30% over. But you don't have to. So, that's what I wanted to talk about there, I believe. Last one. Very last one. Phase 5. Phase 5 is already like, it's just making everything a bit rounder, right? And even deeper into, do you really want to invest this much in the build? If you like it, cool, go ahead. In terms of tree, there's like 100 tree now, right? So, bit more live. Getting this stuff. If you get this far, definitely make sure you somehow get this. Definitely. I mean, it's a 98 tree if you swap off Alira. And then Lethal Shade, by the way, for bossing. For some bosses, really, really good. Really helps with the damage over time issues the build has. We're also gonna swap off this Curse Mastery. But you can only do that in a specific case, and I'm gonna show you here. And that case is if Herald of Agony has divergent quality and enough quality basically to cover, then it gives more chance to poison. Herald of Agony in general gives us chance to poison, but that goes up from 20 up to 40%. So that gem is expensive, right? Or it used to be quite expensive. So yeah, it's for one passive point, it's quite an investment. You need to figure this out yourself. Also here, I started like putting in all the quality and old quality gems and space and fancy gems, right? So for the main skills, there are a bunch of awakened gems. Awakened Void Manipulation seems a little bit worse than normal efficacy. So maybe you want to save on that one and just get efficacy. But there's at least 2 awakened gems you could get in there. Advanced Traps, Divergent is slightly better. Get all your latest here. Basically, phase 4 already. Like a 21 Seismic you can get really early, by the way. Right? I think it's in the notes, but get 21, even with 0 quality. Just gem level on Seismic is really, really cool. Can corrupt it yourself if you want, but at some point, get a 21-20, right? Get all your other gems. I don't have any other 21 gems in here, but you can obviously, like auras and something, improve them even further. Bossing setup is pretty much the same. Maybe a little bit of quality if you want. Xinginate also, just quality, all the same. This stuff is the same. Some quality, the divergent one if you want to go for this, more quality here. But nothing really changes outside of that. Oh yeah, anomalous despair, right? You can do that. You don't need to do that, it's like 5%, right? However, we want fancy gems. You need to think about if it's worth it for you or not. If you plan early already to definitely take this further because you just want to, getting them earlier, the Awaken gems is obviously better because they start at level 1 and they level really slowly and can only go up to 5 or 6, I believe. So yeah, if you already know, then maybe this investment earlier is a good idea. And in that phase 5, the gear does not change, and that's basically it. As said, everything is like, every consideration basically is in the notes down here. You can have a look at that. I hope I didn't forget to talk about anything. I had no notes getting into this guide, but I also did it for a few times now. And I hope this is helpful to you. And you can always join the Discord. A lot of people have already done that to set this all back. And I'm super happy to help you guys out, like I did last league and the other leagues. If you guys have any questions, always make sure you can post your PUB also before you're asking. I mean, I don't want to stop anybody from asking, but in terms of super common issues is you're not spell suppression capped because of this node. That happens all the time. You don't have resistance. Your gear is a really weird bases, right? Pure evasion bases, a lot of them, because they are cheaper in terms of spell suppression and everything. Just having like missing all that armor and stuff, it's just really hurting you. And yeah, or just doing other random things. But mostly it's more, for the vast majority, it's defensive issues just because they missed something, and that's totally fine. They're either not spell suppression capped, or have very odd bases, or running very different auras because they wanted way more damage, and running double cold iron points and some other craziness, right? Yeah, but typically it's this node. That's why you're dying. And that's it, I think. How long is it? 140? Nice. Really cool. Cool. Guys, have a really cool league start. I'm gonna see you. Bye.